Thank you so much for being here at CSIS for this event. I'm Carl Endifirth, and I'm the chair, the Wadhwani Chair for U.S. India Policy Studies here at CSIS. Very delighted that you could all be here for this occasion. We are honored to have four distinguished speakers here with us this morning, beginning with the Minister of Commerce and Industry, Anand Sharma. We want to welcome him not only to CSIS but to Washington. He has just arrived from New York City. We're delighted to have you here, and he's got a number of very important meetings here over the next 2 days, and we're so pleased that he could be here to share his thoughts with us. And he's our keynote speaker, and he will be speaking on emerging economies and evolving partnerships. So that will be his remarks. We're honored to have with us again the Ambassador of India to the United States, Meera Shankar. Ambassador, thank you so much for being here. We are almost feeling like family these days. As many of you know, on June 9th, we had a major event on Capitol Hill with the Senate India Caucus, Senators Warner and Cornyn, and Ambassador Shankar graced us with her presence there, along with Assistant Secretary Robert Blake, to talk about our relations. So thank you again. You are certainly always so welcome at the events that we have at CSIS. We're delighted to have you here. We also have two additional guests that are here from the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. We have with us Mr. Harsh Marawali, who is the president of FICCI. All of you know this important organization, the largest and oldest business organization in India. We're delighted to have him, as well as having with us Dr. Rajiv Kumar, who is General Secretary of FICCI. So we're so pleased to have both of our guests from FICCI, and they will be speaking on the subject of U.S.-India cooperation in high technology and innovation, which has been identified as one of the key areas that the United States and India wish to pursue. We have bios for all of our speakers and guests. I trust that you have picked those up. We only have until 1 o'clock to hear from them, so I will let their bios speak for themselves. You all know these individuals very well, and rather than taking valuable time to go through their very distinguished CVs, I will ask you to take a look closely at those bios that we have passed out. I'd like to begin with just two very brief comments that will hopefully place what you will hear from our speakers in some context. The first one is our Assistant Secretary of State, I just mentioned, Robert Blake, has been in India, and recently, just this week, he spoke in Kolkata. And he said in his remarks that, and I'm going to read you what Robert Blake had to say. He said, "In an age where innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic power are as important as military and political power, America's future will rest on the power of knowledge, ideas, and economy. In this context, we see no better partner than India." I think that partnership which he is referring to is one that certainly Minister Sharma will be discussing in his remarks on partnership. Secretary Blake also said American businesses see in India a vibrant laboratory for research and innovation that will produce tomorrow's goods and services. I think I also read at some point, I think it was former Commerce Secretary Locke, who said India now has 45 million entrepreneurs. All of this adds up to a great potential for the U.S.-India relationship to explore our commercial ties and to pursue innovation that will be important for the 21st century. Now, having said this is the, as they say, the proverbial good news, there is some not so good news, and that is a piece that I saw in the Indian Express just this week that said that direct foreign investment, FDI, into India declined in the most recent quarter by 9% over the previous year. And according to experts, the government should further streamline FDI policies and make the environment more investment friendly to attract investments. I'm sure that this is something that the minister will be addressing in his remarks. Clearly, we want to see the investment opportunities increase and to see that kind of indicator moving upward. And I think that there are certainly ways that that can be accomplished, and I'm sure that that's going to be discussed by all of our speakers. So we're going to have the following format. We're going to start with Mr. Mariwala to speak for about 10 minutes. And then I'm going to ask Ambassador Shankar to take the podium and make a few remarks and introduce the minister. And then we'll follow at the end of those remarks with Dr. Kumar to end up our speaking portion. And then we're going to turn to your questions and comments immediately after that. So I'm delighted that you're all here. I think we've got a great program, 4 wonderful speakers, and may we start.
Honorable Minister, Mr. Anand Sharma, Her Excellency Ambassador Meera Shankar, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all of you. I am very happy to be here. On behalf of FICCI, we have, I must say that we have a big partnership with U.S. in the area of high technology group. And we also have partnership with Lockheed Martin and University of Texas at Austin in the area of innovation program, wherein we have trained 240 innovators in entrepreneurial and commercial management. So FICCI has had its relationship with US in this area. And going forward, I believe that if India has to change its course of direction, if India has to maintain its high GDP growth rate, innovation is going to be very, very crucial. Our reliance on traditional technologies and old methods will not do. We will have to reinvent them. Not only technologies, but processes also. And in this respect, we need to look at India as a size of the population in terms of its poverty. And we need to innovate more for what we call the bottom of pyramid opportunities. In this area, we have seen many Indian companies taking lead. We've seen companies like Tata's coming out, Tata Nano car at $2,000 price point. We've seen the 1 rupee sachet for shampoos. We've seen telephone calls, mobile calls available for 1/4 of a cent. And there are many other innovations in the pipeline in this regard. Tata also are pioneering, or they have pioneered, purification of drinking water, which is available at almost 1.5%, 1.5 of a cent per liter. And I'm sure there are many other opportunities in this aspect. So going forward, I believe that the bottom of pyramid opportunities are very, very high. We also need to innovate in the area of sustainability, social and financial inclusion, mainly for the benefit of our masses. If we have to do this, we need to co-create and cross-fertilize our technologies with those of advanced nations. I am coming from a sector where, in packaged goods manufacture, where P&G, Procter & Gamble, has adopted a different approach to innovation, what they call the C&D approach, connect and develop approach. So instead of developing or doing research in each and everything, what they do is they interact with global organizations through an internet search. And they have developed through this approach many new products. They've also cut down substantially on their R&D manpower costs. And I think they've been far more successful. I think the whole belief is that you can't do everything on your own. And in this interdependent world, it is important for organizations and nations to leverage each other in terms of their capabilities. In this respect, the cooperation is very, very important between India and USA. More relevant in specific technologies where US is way ahead of many other nations. I met Senator John Cornyn yesterday, and I must say that his Defense Committee's direction for greater cooperation between India and US producers is a very big step in this direction. More importantly, it is President Obama's initiatives on environment, clean energy, and education which we need to take further. We believe that U.S. economy will be revived much sooner on the back of innovation and pioneering of new technologies. In this aspect, India can also play an important role. We have developed capabilities in science and technology, which can be used to provide detailed engineering and testing inputs. This is already happening in sectors like KPOs and clinical testing of pharmaceutical products. FICCI can play a very important role, a catalytic role, in promoting this and removing impediments in expansion of bilateral relationships. Let me end by saying that we see tremendous opportunities for mutual benefit, and I am sure that this seminar will contribute positively towards this. I now look forward to our Honorable Minister address to give us further leads in this direction. Thank you very much.
Honorable Anand Sharma, Commerce and Industry Minister of India, Ambassador Carl Lindeforth, Harsh Mariwala, President of FICCI, Rajiv Kumar, ladies and gentlemen. Let me at the outset thank CSIS and FICCI and Ambassador Lindeforth in particular for organizing this interaction, allowing us to share thoughts on the growing India-US trade and economic engagement. I think this has become a key element of the India-US strategic partnership. And as the Indian economy continues to grow, we will have enhanced requirements of both capital and technology, where there will be a natural synergy with the United States. As we look ahead, it is not just innovation, which Mr. Mariwala spoke about, but other sectors as well, which will provide enormous opportunities. And I would like to mention two in particular. I think infrastructure, where India will need to invest something like $1 trillion maybe over the next 5 years. 2012 will be the next planned period, and the requirement of investment in infrastructure will be huge. There'll be an enormous business opportunity in the entire infrastructure sector, be it in terms of finance, be it in terms of participating in bids, be it in terms of actually investing in particular projects through public-private partnerships. And the Indian government has created a facilitative framework for this through its FDI policies, where 100% investment is allowed in most of the infrastructure sectors, including power, roads, ports, and so on, electricity, where you can invest 100% in generation, transmission, and distribution. So this I would see as one particular opportunity. The other would be manufacturing. Now, I know this is not something which has been a focus of the India-US relationship, where the interaction and the synergies have come from the services sector so far, particularly the knowledge-based services sector, such as information technology. That will continue to grow. But where there's a new opportunity which fits in with India's priorities and the need to create more employment within India for those who are not so highly skilled, is the manufacturing sector. This sector has seen a turnaround. We've seen growth rates last year of over 8%, and for several months, growth rates have been more than double digits. It continues to be a priority for India. We are setting up several industrial zones. There's the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, which will be along the Delhi-Mumbai high-speed rail freight corridor, basically building on the advantages of connectivity. I think there will be something like 9 industrial zones along this corridor in 6 states, most of which are investment and industry friendly, There will be ports and airports for quick connectivity. So it might be of interest to US companies to look at taking a sector, for themselves in one of these new industrial townships which are coming up, or zones which are coming up. Some are taking off quicker, some are taking off slower, depending on the state. But some, for instance, in Gujarat have already begun to take off because they had the land already. So this will be a big opportunity, both in the high-tech segment of manufacturing as well as in other segments of manufacturing. And this can also be in sectors which then relate to Indian demands, because the market is going to grow. For instance, if infrastructure is going to be a key area, then construction equipment and machinery is going to be something for which there will be heavy demand, and boring machines and so on. And it makes sense to produce these in India because they're large, huge. Moving them around is not that cost effective. And if you have a growing market for several decades, then production in India makes sense. So these are the two new areas I would like to suggest as opportunities in addition to the innovation sector. It is my pleasure and honor today to introduce our keynote speaker, Minister Anand Sharma, who is the Commerce and Industry Minister of India. India-US trade and investment is robust and growing rapidly. Our two-way trade in goods reached the highest level ever of $48.75 billion in 2010, a 30% growth on the previous year. There's also been strong growth in trade and services in a broadly balanced manner. And the full figures which are available for 2008 show that it was $38 billion. These growing economic ties have given weight to our strategic partnership. One of the key leaders, which has been one of the key leaders in developing this partnership. And of course, Minister Sharma has been at the forefront of proposing and supporting an expansion of our bilateral ties. He has taken personal interest in driving the growth of bilateral commercial linkages and has always focused on cooperative interests. His focus on diversification of economic ties has resulted in exponential growth among private sector stakeholders, including in the fields of innovation and technologies. One of the measures that Minister Sharma has led in India is simplification of the foreign investment policy. He oversaw consolidation of the FDI policy guidelines into a single document, and this has been done in a transparent way in consultation with all stakeholders. It will be periodically updated every 6 months, again through a process of transparent consultation with all stakeholders. The other innovation I mentioned are these industrial or manufacturing zones which are being set up across the country with a view to providing a fillip to manufacturing. He has also taken the initiative to crystallize a national policy on manufacturing, which is due to be out shortly, and which we hope will provide added focus to this sector. As Commerce and Industry Minister, he has been India's leading voice in international trade negotiations. He's put in a strong personal focus in reviving the stalled Doha round, including through convening a ministerial meeting in Delhi. During his leadership, India has also advanced the economic partnership with several countries, including through the India-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement and the Comprehensive Economic Partnership and Cooperation Agreements with Korea, Malaysia, and Japan, which were all concluded during his tenure. I know Carl Lindefoot mentioned FDI. Well, I think FDI inflows into India have increased quite substantially in recent years. though they did fall in 2010. I think in 2008 and 2009, they were over $37 billion, which is a high for India. Some of the reduction in 2010 is because both in 2008 and 9, there were very high value purchases, for instance, of Ranbaxy or the very big Vodafone investment, which sometimes can create a distortion in terms of how you see the statistics. But I'm glad to say that in April this year, in 2011, we are seeing FDI inflows increase. It's in 1 month, we've got over $3 billion, which is the same as what we got in the first quarter, which was a bit low. So it's showing a sign of increase. But clearly, we are conscious of the need to create a facilitative environment because we would like to encourage more foreign direct investment into the Indian economy. And we believe that there is an opportunity and that this economy will provide the economic momentum in a major way in the years ahead. I'm sure that under Minister Sharma's leadership, we will continue to look for ways to optimize avenues for international trade creation through more such agreements. We are negotiating one with the EU. With the U.S., we have discussions on a bilateral investment treaty, and we would hope that those could be accelerated. Minister Sharma has also played a sterling role in Indian politics and in managing India's foreign relations, having served for many years as Minister of State for External Affairs. In India and in countries of Africa, he is known for his personal commitment to the struggle against apartheid. He's been in the forefront of driving the trade and economic engagement between India and Africa. He's a leader with grassroots political support and has been one of the key voices of the student and youth movement in India, having been one of the founders of the National Student Union of India, which is the student wing of the Indian National Congress. We look forward to hearing Minister Sharma's thoughts on the opportunities that India offers as a dynamic emerging economy for evolving a long-term mutually beneficial partnership with the United States. Thank you.
Ambassador Karl Lindeforth, Ambassador Meera Shankar, Mr. Harsh Mariwala, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, members of the CSIS, scholars, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here once again in Washington. My last visit was in September. But that doesn't mean that during the intervening period we have not remained engaged with our friends and the leadership of this great country. India and the United States are in a relationship which is strategic, which is of special significance not only to our two countries, but to the entire world. We had a path-breaking visit by President Barack Obama to India in November. And he, in his address, which was very well received and applauded by the Indian Parliament, had said that this relationship will have a defining influence in the 21st century world. I do subscribe to that optimism and confidence, because the way the relationship has evolved, embracing core sectors, the trust, the respect that we have for each other, and also considering that both the countries are pluralistic societies. We have respected diversity, multilingual, multicultural. The different ethnic groups come and live with each other, do not tolerate each other's existence, but happily coexist. That is the difference which our two countries have demonstrated to the rest of the world, which in my view is important given the conflict, the distrust that has enveloped many parts of the world. Today, as we see the global scenario, it is important for us to remain connected with the changes that are taking place, to adapt to them and to respond. Before I make a comprehensive observation on what our two countries can do together to further consolidate the existing relationship, I would like to mention that this period in the history of the world is not different from the periods that we have seen in the last century or before. There are always decades which are defining, which bring about transformations and changes, political as well as economic. And those changes have taken place in Europe, in America, but now in Asia, Africa, and South America. There was a time after the Renaissance when the Western Europe developed and determined the global economic agendas. But in the last century, during and after the Second World War, it was the emergence of the United States of America as the preeminent power. And it's the Europe and America together who wielded tremendous influence in determining changes that were taking place in the world until the last decade of the century that we have left behind, when we saw tectonic changes, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the emergence of new countries which were confident and asserting themselves through their growth and development. So the world has been changing, and so is the order. Many of you would recall, it was said in the 90s, early 90s, that the world has shifted to become a unipolar world. There were many of us who had a different view. I also belong to that group of people who were clear that the world is complex. The challenges confronting us are overwhelming. When we look at each one of them individually, from poverty to climate change to terrorism, pandemics, hunger, unemployment, for any country or group of countries to address and resolve single-handedly or together. I don't think that it is possible without a strategic cooperative global partnership. And that would call for a world which is inclusive and democratic, an order which is representative, not unipolar, not bipolar, but a multipolar world. That is the reality of today. The European Union is a reality. There are integrations taking place in other parts of the world, whether in Asia, Africa, South Americas. The emerging economies and the developing countries, as we are referred to, are also making some contribution in driving the global economic growth. Today, close to 47-48% of the world's population is living in these emerging countries, the BRIC countries. BRIC countries are contributing almost half of the global economic output. And in the coming years, in this decade itself, the emerging 7 countries, besides the BRIC countries, also include Indonesia, Mexico, and Turkey, will overtake the G7 in PPP terms, and in less than 2 decades in real terms. If we look at what has happened between the last 2 decades, especially after the turn of the century, the emerging countries' contribution has grown up from 16% to 30%, and now moving towards 40%. Whereas the developed countries, when we look at the production, when we look at the growth, has come down, unfortunately, from 70% to 40%. So we have to relate to these changing dynamics and accordingly create institutional linkages so that we can do more than what perhaps we have been able to do so far. The numbers are always interesting, but in 2 years from now, the GDP of Europe, America, and Asia will be equal sized, each contributing 25% to the world's GDP, and the rest will come from the remaining countries. And this will keep on changing. As I make this observation, we have to be clear that what the world is witnessing is a rebalancing of the global economy, and which was required. For historical reasons, the overwhelming majority on this planet Earth for centuries was left behind the still developing countries, which we are. We have not reached that stage in our development where we can say that our per capita incomes have reached anywhere near the levels of where the developed countries' per capita incomes were even in the 20th century or 19th century, end of 19th century. Many countries are still there where Europe and Americas were in 1914 or 1940. So there is a huge gap. But still these changes are very important when we look at production, when we look at consumption. Some countries have shared approaches and similar models. Some do not. In India, the consumption and production, or the growth model, is completely different from that of our big neighbor China, which is driven more by exports. It's the largest manufacturer, exporter in the world today. Whereas India's vibrant economic growth has been influenced by domestic consumption, by domestic demand. And our share in the global trade is still very low considering the fact that we are home to 17.5% of the world's population, to have less than 2% or 2% share in the merchandise trade and almost the same in services is not adequate. We are growing, but we are mindful of the fact that we need to do more. But these consumption patterns are also changing. Take the case of Asia and America again. Asia is home to 45% of the world's population, and the consumption has been $7 trillion. In case of US, it's $10 trillion, whereas the population share in the world is 5%. That's the gap. But in the next decade, it's going to change dramatically. US will still keep on growing, but it will move to 15 trillion as per the projections in consumption, whereas Asia will move from $7 trillion to $20 trillion. Certainly, that will have an impact in the living standards, improving the living standards of the countries which are still grappling with the issues of poverty, of education, and healthcare. But going beyond that, the challenges which I referred to earlier, briefly, would demand that the leaders, the governments, the policymakers focus their attention in all sincerity to working out on forging partnerships or strengthening existing partnerships to meaningfully and effectively address these very challenges. They are not going to disappear. We have seen the various results at the turn of the century when the Millennium Developmental Goals were spelled out. The progress is weak. The gap is increasing. And that will continue to test the leadership of the world. I didn't refer to the subsequent challenges which have surfaced with a vengeance, and 2 of them have resurfaced in less than 3 years. The financial crisis, unlike the previous one, that how devastating it was when you look at the sheer pace at which it spread, affecting all continents and countries. And then followed the economic crisis. Though in common parlance it's only referred to as the economic crisis. But we must not forget that unlike the previous economic crises, which have come with regularity, whether the 70s, 80s, the Argentinian crash, the East Asian crash, this one was different because it followed a financial crisis. So it was deeper. And that's why longer lasting. There's no recovery. We have not left it behind. It's still very much there because the recovery is uneven. It's wobbly, as we see what happens in Europe. The demand has not returned to pre-recession levels, even in the developed countries. It's a matter of concern. And in many cases, if the growth has returned, moved to the positive territory, it is without the return of jobs. So what this calls for? In our considered view, that's what my Prime Minister has said in the G20 meeting in London, that was in April 2009, that the time is to engage more and to resist the tendency towards protectionism. That has happened in the past, and nations and the world as such learnt bitter lessons. I hope that those lessons are fresh in our minds. Because protectionism is, has always been, and shall always be counterproductive. It will deepen the recessions, delay the recoveries, which the world needs. And that's why what Ambassador Meera Shankar was referring to, that some of the steps which we took, those were consciously taken. We were questioned. I was asked by many of my colleagues that, are you sure, Anand Sharma, what you are doing? You're going to sign free trade agreements. This 2009 was not 2011. It was very grim environment. But we did. We moved ahead because we believe that this is the time to dismantle barriers, not to erect new ones. And we shall continue doing that without repeating what we have been able to achieve. We are presently negotiating many more comprehensive economic cooperation agreements, or the FTAs as they are referred to, with a number of countries. With Indonesia, with Canada, with Australia, with New Zealand. We are engaging more, as is reflected in our concluding successfully ambitious agreements with Japan and Korea, Malaysia and others, which Ambassador referred to be integral to the process of a dynamic development that is taking place in our extended region. That Asia is moving towards larger economic integration. It had never happened in the past. North America saw through NAFTA the economic integration and the rich dividends. South America has moved in that direction. The countries, the ASEAN countries as they are referred to, that's again a very vibrant region, and the economic integration that has taken place. The same is happening in Africa. At least 7 of the regional economic communities there, some have overlapping membership, are working closely. And there is the Africa Union, which has overarching umbrella for all these RECs, as they call it, the regional economic communities. Therefore, it has become an imperative that Asia is also part of this global process of regional integrations. Besides these agreements, there's the other stream which is now flowing in the right direction. That's the ASEAN plus 6, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership of East Asia. And plus 6 are China, India, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. We know that United States of America has also taken a number of initiatives, including now the much discussed, when we meet, we do talk, and I'll be asking Ambassador Ron Kirk later about the progress on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So it is good that leadership here is also connecting with the trend, and the U.S. has to do it, because the United States of America, irrespective of whatever changes take place in the world, remains the preeminent economic power and will continue to be there as one of the most influential countries for decades to come, even as other countries rise. This because of the institutions that this country has. Its universities, the number of PhDs in mathematics and science who come out, the investment in technologies, investments in innovation. That's we are also seeking to do. So as partnerships are forged between countries through various agreements, There have to be partnerships within the countries, between the government and the industry, which we are very much committed to in India. There has to be partnerships between institutions. That's what India and United States of America should do. Not that we have not taken steps. These priorities stand identified. We have economic dialogue, commercial dialogue, strategic dialogue. We have the Trade Policy Forum, right from space sciences to nuclear sciences, general science and technology, education. These are identified as the priority sectors of engagement, and also agriculture, which is important if we have to ensure that one of the two challenges which has resurfaced, which has never actually went away, that is of food security, is addressed. I will not go into details of these sectors, but I have just listed them. That what the two governments are doing, we should ensure that more traction is there in each of these sectors. And also in working together in innovation, in the new technologies which are going to come in this decade and the decade to follow. Because technologies do make enormous difference. We have seen what they did the last century. Here in this country, the defense technologies, the defense manufacturing gave a real thrust to industrial capacity building, because many of these technologies have dual uses or multiple uses. India was able to move forward because we had built the capacity, had the human resources and the institutions to connect with the new technologies which came. They brought about a transformation in the world. That's the information technology, the communication technologies. And those few years really changed the way we connect with each other between countries and between continents. That at the press of the button there is a flow of capital, flow of information, knowledge. Nobody would have thought, at least my generation, we would not have thought that we will live to see that day. And it is happening so fast, and it just keeps on moving forward. But the technologies which can be used for the welfare for the humankind. Manufacturing policy was referred to, and what we are keen to do in the manufacturing sector. Yes, it's true that we have been working on a national manufacturing policy for the last 1.5 years. And very soon, it will become a reality. This will be the biggest policy initiative which India would have taken after we took the initiative for opening up India's economy, the reforms, and the liberalization, when Dr. Manmohan Singh was India's finance minister. And it is he who chaired this meeting on the 9th of this month. And this entire process has been transparent, open, democratic. We believe in engaging with all stakeholders so that the policy formulation is inclusive and has broad-based consensus. There cannot be any unanimity on any policy. There will still be many critics who will find 2 faults or 20 faults. And that should be there. That's part of democracy. That discourse will not change in any country. But through this policy, we aim to increase the share of manufacturing in India's GDP from 16%, where it has been stagnating. Not that it has not grown, it is growing. But so is the economy. And we want to take it to minimum 26% in less than 15 years. It is an imperative for India to do so, and we are determined to do it. Because for a country of 1.2 billion people, with 100 million joining the workforce in the next 10 years, if not less, that's the only area where, besides growth, job opportunities will be created and sustainable employment will be there. So what we propose to do, in addition to what Ambassador Meera Shankar referred to as the 9 smart cities which are coming up along the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor, to have mega manufacturing and investment zones. Not too many, maybe 5. But these will be integrated mega greenfield industrial townships, where infrastructure would be created. And we hope that these regions will become, in the coming decades, hubs of innovation, hubs of manufacturing, and also converting India into a workshop of the world, because we have the human resources and the institutions. When we look at this most important partnership for our two countries, between the two largest democracies, we want America, its institutions, its industry, its investors to be our partners in this journey. Also looking at the knowledge sectors of the economy, some of which we referred to, but also biotechnology, nanotechnology, value-added manufacturing, precision engineering. These are the areas we need to look at. But how will we be able to do it? Unless and until we invest more in creating the human resources, in empowering our people, which can only be done through training and skills, through vocational education. Our present capacity is to train in skills maybe 5 million annually, and we want to take it to at least 15 million in less than 5 years. So we are investing in institutions. Industry and government are partner. New, at the high end, we have new IITs and IIMs, the Indian Institutes of Technology and Management, coming up. For the first time in 50 years, we are more than doubling these institutions. They require enormous resources, and we do not have too many. When you look at the IITs and IIMs from 7 and 8, now we're going to more than double, but again in the same range, 8 and 9. But we are also presently setting up 1,600 more industrial training institutes, which will be adopted by the industry, 10,000 vocational training centers, 50,000 skills development centers. That is not something which is a dream or on paper. Actually, it is now moving. There's a national skills initiative. There's a dedicated corporation and corpus that has been created. We are tying up with industries. We are encouraging industry. We are going to double up our own government's contribution also to innovation. There has been a regular dialogue between Indian industry and also between us and our global partners. We have brought in many modules of these trainings in industrial clusters, some of which are successful. I propose to discuss all this during my stay, and as I mentioned, that this is a dialogue which continues. Yesterday I had very purposeful exchange with the leading captains of the U.S. industry. Tomorrow we shall be doing that in Washington. And the dialogue, the interaction, helps in creating a better environment, a better understanding. Before we walked into this hall, we were in the holding room, and Carl Firth was saying as to what the mood in the Congress is and how clear the India caucus is in enhancing the partnership and the economic engagement. There cannot be a partnership which is complete without the economic component, and a partnership, as we've said, which has enormous potential. Therefore, we need to create better awareness in both our countries, particularly among the policymakers, so that decisions are taken in the spirit of positivity, keeping in mind the larger objective, which are the correct objectives our leaders and our countries have set for ourselves. Thank you.
Honorable Minister Sharma, Ambassador Inderfirth, Ambassador Meera Shankar, President Harsh Mariwala, friends who I recognize a few here, ladies and gentlemen. Great privilege to be here at CSIS for this seminar on innovations and cooperation between our two economies. And having sort of following from the minister's remarks and also having transited very recently from the academic and think tank world, where I was for a number of years, to the well-grounded realities of Indian industry, wherein I now belong, I want to actually emphasize that the huge potential that the minister pointed out and the others have referred to between the two countries will be achieved if we emphasize on the practical side of it, and if we emphasize on the implementation of what we have, what we've agreed to, and if we actually focus on the agents of production and the agents of exchange in the two economies. I say this also on the basis of the paper that I had written for the Center for New American Security on the eve of President Obama's visit, and which has been published, where I pointed out that India and the U.S. relate at three levels very distinctly. One is the G2G, the other is the B2B, and the third is the civil society to civil society. And these are three kind of almost parallel tracks that go on sometimes, with ups and downs in one and the sort of steady state in the others, etc. And I now believe quite firmly that the B2B relations, which are there, are actually going to be the driver of this relationship as we go forward. Simply because in our two countries, in these two economies, which are primarily entrepreneurial driven, which are private sector driven, the intensification of the ties between the businesses that we have in these two countries will, in a sense, inform, and not just inform, but drive, as it were, the relationship, the political relationship, and even I say the civil society relationships. And these relationships, these business B2B relationships, as Harsh pointed out, are going to be based increasingly on the innovative capabilities and the capability for India especially to absorb the innovations which will be generated in the US as it tries to rejuvenate itself, as it tries to go forward in the areas that the President Obama has pointed out. And I feel very confident that we in India have the capabilities, we in India have the science and technology capabilities and the entrepreneurial dynamism and capability to not only just absorb these innovations, but to adapt them, use our famous techniques of jugaad, as you would get to know, as when you get to know India, and also to and then to innovate further on them to make it possible for them to be transferred to other countries in Africa and South Asia and so on. So I think that's the route that I would like to emphasize that that we need to go forward on. And here I think it is therefore quite important for me to give you some examples of what is happening already in the India-US relationship at the very practical level. One is, let's say, is a cooperation that we've got where we've identified more than 2,000 innovators, and out of which 240 have been commercially trained under our Lockheed Martin University of Texas at Austin program. This cooperation between them and FICCI, where we send these budding innovators, when you incubate them and then send them for commercial training to the Lockheed Center, where they come back after 4 weeks, and now, according to the data monitor, they have created about $80 million worth of value for the Indian GDP from new technologies, from new innovations. There are similar initiatives that are going on in the field of under the U.S. India Agricultural Knowledge Initiative, where again we need a huge new burst of technologies which will increase yields, which will increase productivity, and will keep up with the demand, which as we know that today in India, the demand for agricultural products, only 18% is that for cereals. The rest 82% is the non-cereal demand, which is vegetables, fruits, and etc., where the logistics, the air conditioning supply chains, where the supply networks have all to be created, and again there innovation as jointly created between Indian and US firms will be most important. And I don't want to go on here, because I know that you are all waiting for us to for the opportunity to ask questions of the minister who is present here. But just to say that between 1974 and 2011, more than 10 agreements have been signed between India and the US on the science, technology, and knowledge front alone. And these are there in various stages of exploitation and implementation. And I dare say the time has come for all of us to focus much more sharply and put our energies together on removing the impediments which are preventing the fuller exploitation of these agreements. And as far as I'm concerned, I have transited from the think tank world to the industrial world to try and put my shoulder to this most important task, because I think otherwise we will remain at the level where we don't want to be, and will not see sufficient progress as we should be doing in these two most critical ties, in the ties between the two most important countries in the new centuries. Thank you very much.
Rajiv, thank you very much. Thank all the speakers for their excellent remarks. And I think we've got about 20 minutes left, and I am not going to take the prerogative of the chair to ask questions, because I want you to do it. So we'll immediately go to the floor, and we'll start here. If we can have the mic, we'll come around to you. And if you could identify yourself and your affiliation and who you would like to address the question to, that'd be wonderful.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Jim Berger from Washington Trade Daily. I just have a question for the minister. It's actually related to the last point of Mr. Kumar. Mr. Minister, are you satisfied with the pace of progress on U.S. India high technology trade? The U.S. had promised to make India a strategic partner when it came to high technology trade, and reduce the present barriers that exist. I guess it's a loaded question. Are we moving fast enough?
Perhaps I could answer that because it's a matter of detail. I think we've welcomed the readjustment of U.S. export control policies or the regulatory framework as they apply to India. I think this was a major step forward, which was announced during President Obama's visit. Since then, I think the entities list has been reduced. Companies like DRDO, the Defense Research and Development Organization, and its allied companies, the Indian Space Research Organization and its allied companies, Bharat Dynamics Limited, have been removed from the entities list. This opens up the possibility of more high technology trade. We've also agreed that India will be moved up in terms of how it's categorized under the different export controls. So we were at the bottom, along with, I think, countries like Sudan and Djibouti and so on. And now we will be moved up into the friends category, which hopefully should make it easier to process license applications pertaining to India. We've also agreed to some reciprocal steps on removing US unilateral controls, which are there for crime control or regional stability reasons. And the US has agreed to support India's membership of 4 multilateral export control regimes, including the national, the NSG the MTCR, the Australia Group, and the Wassenaar Agreement. So it's a pretty substantial package. It's in the process of being implemented. Clearly, we'd like it to be implemented fast, because this is an area where I think there are natural synergies between the two sides. As you heard from our speakers, you know, technology and innovation will be very important in terms of the ability of our companies to realize the potential for strengthening trade and business ties between the two countries.
Wolf Gross, recently retired from the defense industry, and my question follows as the night from Ambassador Shankar's just completed comments. What has not happened to date is the Indian government in particular testing the bona fides of the U.S. Relaxation of high technology trade. We have Indian services which are perfectly willing to ask for technology from the U.S. suppliers, the commercial suppliers. And the U.S. commercial suppliers' hands are tied unless the government of India indicates its interest in these technologies on an official level. With that, we can work miracles. And I would ask Minister Sharma to carry this message back to his colleagues in the Ministry of Defense. I've never met a bashful Indian when it comes to business, but a lot of them seem to be sitting in South Block.
See, policy formulation, whether in this sector and in other sectors, which was referred to earlier by Ambassador Karl and Firth also, is a continuous process. And that's what India has seen it, and those who have engaged with us are fully aware. It's always incremental, it is progressive, and moves forward. For example, in the defense sector, we didn't have the participation of the private sector at all. Now, for the private sector, Indian private sector, is 100% participation investment in manufacturing defense equipment and technologies is allowed, and 26% foreign direct investment. But that does not preclude the foreign companies from entering into a joint venture with the Indian entity, and many of the leading defense manufacturers from this country, from UK and Europe, they are already doing it. They have forged some very important partnerships so that more manufacturing can take place in India too. That sharing of technologies which have dual use or multiple industrial uses also. So we are moving in that direction. We had been discussed through a paper with the stakeholders, as you would be aware, as to what more can be done in the defense sector. And those discussions are still on. There have been 2 brainstorming sessions very recently between 5 ministers, since defense is a strategic and sensitive sector, so the defense establishment has to be there on board. But the meetings have been chaired by Finance Minister, the Defense Minister, myself, the Home Minister. We have been together, and we'll be meeting again. And also, when we look at other areas, we are conscious of what the industry has said and what the partners and investors have said. So we are always working to bring about a greater degree of rationalization, clarity, simplification, also definitional clarities on ownership and control, which we have done. But the policies, as such, will move forward only in one direction. That's ahead. There's no question of a pause or a reversal. As I said, that we believe in a process that is inclusive, and we are doing that.
In terms of government, defense, engagement. I mean, I just point out that we never used to buy any equipment from the U.S., but we bought $4 billion worth of equipment from the U.S., including through the foreign military sales route in recent years, and have just placed an order for another 4.1 billion in terms of the C-17. So clearly, as far as India is concerned, the government is willing to test the U.S. government's willingness to share up-to-date technologies with us.
Could I ask for a couple of innovation questions? The reason I'm saying that is that FICCI is a leader in this field. Dr. Kumar has written about that. Mr. Mariwala has a foundation on innovation. And FICCI, I've heard that you're going to add another I to FICCI for innovation. Place that into the title of your organization. So if I could ask for a couple of innovation questions, Alyssa Ayers, please.
Alyssa Ayers with the State Department. Thanks for the segue. I was interested in hearing, Honorable Minister, where you see the innovation and high-tech piece in the national manufacturing policy that's about to come out. I don't know if there's something that you can offer in more detail here for this audience.
Well, we are discussing. There is innovation is very much reflected in the policy, but there is a National Innovation Council of the Prime Minister. We have declared this decade as the decade of innovation. And for the industries, we are setting up sectoral councils, innovation councils, which will then merge with the national initiative. That process is also in an advanced stage. What we're seeking for innovation is the special treatment, special dispensation, which has been there in the budget when we look at some tax incentives, weighted deductions. And this particular aspect where revenue comes in. So in principle agreement has been reached, but the revenue officials and our secretaries concerned, so there's a committee of secretaries which is presently meeting. By the time I return to Delhi, I'm sure that the final recommendations would be there, because we are keen to put in place this policy as early as possible. I'll be happy to do so in July itself.
Add to that, which is the minister referred to the National Innovation Council, which is headed by Mr. Sam Petroda. And they're actually, what they're trying to do is to set up what they call innovation clusters, whereby they're trying to bring innovative capability within the production clusters that have been identified already. And I think this is something that the industry chambers and some industries are actually sort of, quite actively involved in identifying them. And this is where I think the U.S. industry, can actually really participate in a very active way in creating. For example, there is a textile or the auto component or the, or the IT sector, where there are clusters of, firms already to bring in the innovative capability, and then try and create a sort of Italian sort of model whereby these units around them upgrade their technology and their global competitiveness through the use of innovative capability, which is enshrined then within these clusters. I think that's the big initiative that is starting off there. And the last thing that I kind of wanted to mention is that there are these incubating centers which have been established now in every Institute of Indian Institute of Technologies, through government grants, but also through very active industry participations. For example, the Bombay IIT is a case in point, where there's a lot of this going on, and there is also and foreign companies are actually actively participating in those. So on the innovation side, and finally the CSIR system, and led by the earlier absolutely amazing Dr. Professor Ramesh Mashelkar, had created this whole new system about public-private partnership between the CSIR and the private industry, which has yielded lots of innovative, ideas and lots of innovative, advances in several sectors. So all of that together means that the innovative climate is, and the policy ecosystem is getting more, sort of vibrant in India as we speak.
Let me add one more thing to what Raji was saying. I think FICCI has also been invited by the NIC to take 1 or 2 clusters and prototype certain studies which will make these clusters flourish. So we have 2, 3 options. And the good thing is that they're inviting other associations to partner with them and arrive at what will make these clusters succeed. So currently we have decided to prototype 1 or 2 areas where we will work and actually work with those clusters, find out what can be done over a period of time. It will be more a prototype project, and the learnings of that will get rolled out to other sectors.
Some simple things, are already being done. It's not necessarily innovation, but it's use of technology to improve the environment. For instance, if you have a cluster of leather companies, and then you put in a common effluent treatment plant. There may be small scale, but in public-private partnership with government, you upgrade their capacities to treat the discharge which comes out, thereby improving the environment. So you're using technology to improve the capacities, not just of the companies, but of the overall environment and their business practices, or where you have a chemicals cluster in Vapi and so on. So it has both the purpose of encouraging the development of new ideas and products, but also improving the overall business practices of the companies, particularly where they are in a group and where then it becomes far more economical to upgrade in these areas.
Further innovation questions? I'd like to have in the back here, this gentleman, and I particularly would like to hear about frugal innovation, if anyone wants to ask about that. Washington is trying to be frugal. This would be a good thing to do. Please.
Minister Sharma, Peter Gerritsen, recently returned from the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi. One of the priority sectors you mentioned was the space sector, and I'm curious if there's anything exciting being contemplated in the space sector that might be beyond the typical government-to-government civil space, because the United States has a very burgeoning entrepreneurial space segment where that space sector is looking at a great deal of interesting innovations. There's been this interesting NSS Kalam initiative looking at space solar power. Is there anything particularly interesting happening there?
Well, the institutions are linked. When we look at the commercial usage of space technology, that's happening here. That's also happening in India. ISRO has a subsidiary, it's called the Antrix, which is tying up with the industry. So industrial usage also of the technology or the commercial launches, that is being done. Space cooperation is one of the priority identified areas which I mentioned to earlier. And surely the details I wouldn't be aware of as to what particular project is in the pipeline, but those can be made available to those who are interested in that. But one thing on innovation, moving away from the space question, is that there are institutional linkages which have been established. IIT Mumbai, Rajiv referred to, I was recently in Bangalore in the CMTI, is a national institute of excellence responsible for having developed many technologies which have applications in nuclear sector, in space, and also technologies for precision engineering. I saw with my own eyes the technologies which are being developed, is set up new centers on nanotechnology, on manufacturing technology. But the linkages CMTI has with one of the recent ones with the Fraunhofer Foundation, and within months they have moved to set up a green manufacturing center in CMTI Bangalore. They have developed technologies which have precision well beyond 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter. So these are, what is important, the question which I had asked then, and then talked to the leaders of the industry, is the commercialization of innovation, so that it's not restricted, though there are many of the technologies are sensitive, but they have dual uses, so that industry comes in and these technologies are available for industrial manufacturing. The United States, as I had mentioned in my remarks, will be a very important partner for India in innovation and manufacturing technologies.
Again, in the back, there's a question here. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
My name is Ahmed Mir. I was a Foreign Service Officer and Science Counselor in Delhi for 5 years, and similarly worked in Mexico. It's very interesting, the tremendous progress that has been made between India and the US across the board. And Mr. Shankar has mentioned so many options, even though I'm sort of very sympathetic to the progress that has been done through government channels, as I see from my US background, is that innovation is very central to freedom and independence, and very central to the importance of young performers. And as you have been talking with regard to clusters and with regard to government programs and so on, and CSIR, what one realizes is that there is a very strong component of government and organizational involvement. But as you see in Southern California and in Boston and so on, innovation and what the US really has to offer the world, and India is actually very well connected with that, is through non-governmental sort of connections. And what I would like to ask Mr. Shankar is, are we doing more with regard to that? Communications, magazines, scholarships, and participation, because I think that really will grow very rapidly what your goals are. Government engagement, I also spent 5 years on NAFTA, and I go regularly to Mexico, and I'll tell you, just free trade engagement doesn't result in the progress that we expected of US-Mexico relations. Fortunately, the India relations have been much more successful even without a free trade agreement. Sorry, didn't want to be long. That's it.
No, I think the main innovation partnerships between India and the US are private sector driven. You know, the government basically has a few programs which act as catalysts, but the bulk of it is really from the private sector. If you take a look at the whole, information technology sector, it is entirely driven by private companies. Most of the research and development which is being done in India is being done, much of it, in the private sector on a commercial basis, either by multinational companies themselves who have an R&D center in India, and many of the Fortune 500 companies have R&D centers in India in a range of areas. Again, there are institutional linkages because our universities are connected in the sense that there are 100,000 Indian students in the United States today in US universities, many of them working on cutting edge research. I attended the Science National Foundation annual award, Waterman Award ceremony last year. And out of the 3 people who were being given awards, 2 were of Indian origin. They were Indian Americans, and they had done excellent work. These are young people who will go forward. And then you look at the academic community in the US, the Indian American academic community, particularly in the sciences, maths, engineering, economics. And that also becomes an enormous asset. And many of these institutions have their own linkages. It's not through government in any way. It is direct. The government has 2 very small programs. One is, the Science and Technology Endowment Fund, where both countries contribute $15 million for small projects, joint projects, which will have commercial applications. And 40% of the new administrative board for this, which has been set up, is from the private sector. Similarly, we have the Joint Clean Energy Research Center, which is a virtual center with both governments contributing $25 million each over a period of time, and the ability to raise another 50 million from the private sector. So these are really catalytic programs. They are not really huge programs. The bulk of the energy and drive towards innovation linkages is coming from the private sector. But within India, I think our industry needs to focus more on innovation in terms of spending more of their budget on R&D. Their private sector spend on R&D in India of Indian companies is still very low.
I think we need to wrap this up. I would like to ask one 5-second question and a 5-second response. Do you think we'll be able to reach agreement on a bilateral investment treaty this year between our two countries?
That shall be our endeavor. And we are keen to take it to an early conclusion.
Excellent. I want to thank you all for your being here with us this morning and now into the afternoon. I want to thank Mr. Sharma and Dr. Shankar, Mr. Mariwala, Mr. Kumar, and Vicky for co-sponsoring this with us